Hi everybody, welcome to my channel Frugalisama. My name's Sam and this is where I talk about all things sewing, particularly dressmaking. Today is day 65 of 100 days of sewing, and today I've got a quick video about how to use elastic for gathering into large spaces. So if that's the sort of thing that you like, keep watching. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed so far. If this is the sort of thing that you like, please hit the subscription button and the notification bell will tell you when I've got new videos out. That's usually on a Wednesday with tips and tricks. On a Friday, I've usually got Frugal Fridays, where I bring all the new free patterns, discounts and competitions and challenges that I spotted for the week. And on a Sunday, I usually bring you reviews, plans and makes. So, on to today's video. I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of using the traditional method of gathering into large spaces. So there are many ways of gathering. You can use the dental floss method where you zigzag over. You can actually use your overlocker or a serger. And you can use the traditional way where you put your machine onto the longest stitch length and baste 2 or 3 lines of basting stitches and then pull on those gathers. What I find with that method and the others is that you don't get a very even gather. So this method may not be altogether quicker, although I do find it quicker personally because you're not faffing about trying to get those gathers even, but I find it gives you a much more even, consistent gather. So all that you need for this particular method is a piece of elastic and a sewing machine, and that's it. So I'm going to cut to some video and show you how to do it. I've used it for this dress, which is the Lyra dress from Tilly and the Buttons. The sample that you see me sewing on is the Barden dress by Peppermint Magazine, and that's a free pattern. And the Barden has got a couple of tiers on it, so it's gathered into the bodice, and then it's got a tier and it's gathered into the tier at the bottom as well. So you will see me working on that rather than this one. And this is a method that I would just use for larger expanses of fabric as opposed to sleeve heads and things like that. But for larger expanses, find it much quicker, much easier and much more even results. So onto the tutorial. For this tutorial, all you need is the bodice that you're gathering into, the skirts or the ruffles that you're gathering it into, a piece of elastic and a tape measure and some pins, a pair of scissors. Okay, so in this example I'm gathering a skirt into a bodice. So the bodice is this big and the skirt is significantly wider. Can you see? So what we're going to do is apply elastic, the width of this bodice, onto this skirt to gather it in nice and evenly. So start off by measuring the width of your bodice. So this example is about 51 centimetres, so that's doubled. 1 metre, 2 centimetres, which is about 40 inches. And that's the size that you need to cut your elastic. So I've got a piece of elastic here, and I'm just going to cut it down to that 40 inches. And you can add a little bit of a seam allowance if you want, but it doesn't matter if it's a little bit shorter. It works a little bit better if it's shorter rather than longer. So if you add seam allowance, you need to make sure that you're going to be accurate with the seam allowance. So I'm just going to cut it at 40.5, give myself about 1/4 of an inch. So all I'm going to do now is join that piece of elastic, overlap it there, go to my machine, just sew it together. Just a little zigzag stitch will be fine. So ideally I would use a narrower elastic, something around about this size. I think this is about 1/2 centimetre, but I only had enough of this elastic and it's worked just fine. This is just over a centimetre. Seam allowance that I'm working with is a centimetre seam allowance, which is 3/8 of an inch. But if you've got 5/8 of an inch seam allowance or a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, this is just fine. Cutting it a little bit fine with this wider on a smaller seam allowance, but I just use what I've got. Next step is to mark the quarter marks on the bodice or the tier that you're gathering into and the skirt and tier that you're gathering into. So to easily find that, just bring your side seams together, and that's one set of quarter marks, and then the other set will be there. So just mark those clearly. You can use a pin for now. So the side seams are nice and easy to see, and then you've got the front and back centre as well. You can do the same for the skirt or tier that you're gathering into. So again, the side seams are easy to find. Make sure you've got it the right way up. Them in at the sides, There's your centre, and there's your other centre. Make sure that this piece of elastic isn't twisted. What you're going to do now is grab the piece of elastic that you've just sewn together and put quarter marks into that as well. I'm going to use a Sharpie just so that you can see it. Normally I wouldn't use a Sharpie, I'd use like a friction pen or something like that. But if you want to reuse the elastic, fold it in half again. So the bit that you've just sewn up, that can be one half. Fold it in half for the second half. Bring those two together. And then you've got your quarter marks. And you want to be able to see these clearly after you've taken the pins out, because you'll be using them when you sew it back into your bodice. So your next step now is to align these marks, keeping them so they're at the top so that they're visible with all the quarter marks. So your first one will go there, that's the bit that you've sewn. Second one on your side seam there. Third one on your centre. And your fourth one on your other side seam. You want the elastic to remain in the seam, so don't pin it too far down. Make sure your pins are nice and secure, but they won't fly off when you get them under the machine. So this is what it's going to look like when you've got your 4 pins in. Looks a little bit odd, but when you stretch it all out like that, which you're going to do at the machine, it should be fine. Just to make sure that those pins are secure before you get to your machine, because you don't want them flying off. So your next step is to go to your machine, set it onto a zigzag stitch. So set your machine to a zigzag stitch, number 7 on my Genoma here, and then you just want to alter your width of your stitch. I've gone down to about 2.5, and I want to alter the length up to about 4. I think the most that you can go is 5. So you've got a long narrow stitch, and it'll look a little bit like this. I've just done a practice to show you. It's not ultra important, it's just that it's easier to unpick at the end of the project. You need the zigzag to be able to fit onto this elastic, so you don't want it too wide. And I've got just a normal universal needle on here, and I'm using a contrast thread to the elastic so that I can see it to unpick it, but that's up to you. So take your work to your machine and just bob your needle just behind that first pin. You're going to be removing that first pin so that you're not sewing over it. Drop your foot, and then if you've got a needle down position like I have, or if you just want to use your hand crank, making sure you miss that pin. Put it down in the down position and pull out your pin. You don't want to be sewing over it. Your next thing to do is then to gently pull on that elastic, and it should align with the top of the skirt or the ruffle or the tier that you're sewing into. If you find that's too long for you to control, now you can put another pin in and just sew to that next pin. I'm going to do it because I'm sewing at a very awkward angle here. So very slowly and very carefully zigzag onto this elastic, making sure that you're staying within your seam allowance. You're not pulling your work through, you're just pulling that elastic so that it stays aligned with the top of that skirt. And stop when you get to your next pin. If you've got the needle down position, this is where it acts as an extra hand for you, so keep your machine on the needle down position. So you're not your next pin now, and you're going to do exactly the same. So gently pull out that pin, and you just go all the way around the skirt doing that, making sure that your top of your elastic is within the seam allowance. It doesn't have to be aligned with the top, but as long as it's within the seam allowance. My elastic is a little bit thick for this project, but it's just what I had. So there's your skirt all gathered into the elastic. Back to your bodice, and that's your bodice with all your quarter marks on. And you're going to have your bodice or one of your tiers inside out, and you're going to have the skirt the right way around, and you're just going to slot that bodice over the top of the skirt. So you've got the skirt inside the bodice, there's your bodice on the top there, and just align those quarter marks now, so your side seams, and your bodice should be the same size as your skirt. If it's a little bit smaller, it doesn't matter. If it's a little bit bigger, then you're going to get some awkward gathers. So if you see, I've got the elastic marked and facing up, and I've got this centre bodice part, so, and again at the back. And then you can put as many pins in as you like. Now, to go back to your machine, make sure that you put it back to the straight stitch, whatever stitch length that you're going to sew at. Just going to sew around with the skirt facing up so that you can see those gathers, making sure that you miss the elastic. You don't want to be sewing onto the elastic this time. You've got the ability to remove your toolbox, so you've got a free arm, that can make it a bit easier. And you're just going to stitch now a straight stitch at the seam allowance. So keeping your skirt with the gathers up makes it so that you can see that the gathers are staying even. Back stitch and then sew all the way around. There you go, it's all sewn in. Some wonky stitching because I'm doing it at a very awkward angle there, but it's all sewn in. I'm just going to flip it the right way around now to show you the gathers. That's on this bodice into that skirt, and I find it just a lot less faffy, and I've got another ruffle to put on here as well. So it's just the elastic to remove now. You can leave it in when it's on just a bodice, but I wouldn't leave it in a ruffle. It's up to you whether you remove it or not. And because you've done a zigzag stitch that's quite wide, it's really quite easy to unpick. It's just a 5-minute job. So it comes unpicked quite easily. You just need to run your unpicker across that line there and just pull on it, and it should just come undone quite easily. So it just comes undone like that. And just a 2-minute job and it's all unpicked. So I hope you found that useful, and let me know below if that's something that you're going to try. I always take the elastic out. If it's in a waistline, you can perhaps leave it in, but if it's in a ruffle, I would take it out. It's nothing but a 2-minute job. If you extend your zigzag long enough, it's quite easy to unpick. So if this is the sort of video that you like, please remember to subscribe, leave me a comment below if this is something that you're going to give a go, and if you hit the notification bell, that will tell you when I've got new videos out. Thank you for watching. Bye.